Okay. All right. So we're going to be drawing botanicals today, and we're going to be using ink is what I'm going to be using, and watercolor. But before we get started, I talked a little bit about what a botanical actually is versus a pretty flower painting. And if you look behind me, you'll see that I like pretty flower paintings. And we're actually going to be doing the purple coneflower today, but we're going to be doing it very different from that. So I will hold up. This is the one that we'll be working on today. Okay. And when I switch my camera over, you'll be able to see it a lot easier. But I want to get us started. I want to jump right in, and I want us to do some slow drawing. This is kind of more of a meditative type drawing exercise, and it just helps you to slow down, and it helps you to focus. And because a lot of times people are like, I don't even know where to start. Where do I start with this? You don't have to start with the actual picture. You can start by just relaxing, just making marks on paper. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to start with just some free flow drawing type exercises. And I'll be using a pen for this. And then we'll move on and we'll do some of the patterns that are going to show up in the purple coneflower that we're doing today. Okay. Now, the goal of this is to be realistic in our drawing so that you can tell that it's a purple coneflower, but also feel free to add in some elements of creativity. Feel free to add in something that, speaks to you, a line or a mark. And we'll talk about some of the different mark making for shading and things like that we'll be able to do. And then I'm going to also share some things with you from one of my favorite botanical artists, Beatrix Potter. I love this little book. And she was, her artwork was beautiful. And I'm sure you're familiar with Peter Rabbit and all of her other illustrations that she did, but she also recorded her environment in notebooks, mushrooms, plants, leaves, animals, everything that she could see, she recorded. And so we're going to kind of draw some inspiration from what she does today too. So anyway, I had some music. Yes.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Is this going to be the slow drawing we're doing now? Is it on the same page that we're going to ultimately do the flower?
Well, I'm going to switch my camera and I'm going to show you. The way that I like to work is that I have 2 pages at once. And so if I'm ever, especially when I'm working with pen, if I'm ever to the point where I'm not so sure about a mark that I want to make, I have my page that I can practice on before I go to the other one. This also kind of keeps me from overworking something, because when you're in that zone and you're working, you don't necessarily want to stop. So you can just move on if you're concerned that something might not be a good idea in the painting that you want to keep, you can always try it out on the other one. Okay. So what I'm going to do, and I'm trying to keep track of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my pens, and I'm just going to do some free flow drawing type lines. And so they'll be very slow, and just let them kind of stretch across the canvas. Just kind of getting used to the pen on paper. You're just relaxing, you're focusing on the line, and then you can come back the other way and just let them intersect. Just like this. Nice and slow. And then you can come back again. Now, if you find yourself just dashing through it, just slow down, stop, take a few deep breaths, and just relax. And we're just warming up. We're just getting those creative juices started. I have music to put on, but for some reason, the new Zoom was not allowing it. And that is how I think my volume got cut off. So let's see here. I'm going to try to find some of that music, get it back for us here. You don't know where it went.
If you want to eat healthy and feel your best, you gotta try cachava.
Of course, they have the ads
Cachava
for
is the
us.
world's-
Can everybody hear that okay?
Yes, I
Okay,
can barely hear it.
I can turn it up.
Thank you. Too many concerts in my youth.
You stood too close to the speakers.
Not yet.
So just kind of listen to the music and use this as a chance to just kind of fill your page with the nice flowing lines.
I had to go get my pens.
And if you're not muted, go ahead and mute. Okay, so you can see that it's just got some beautiful fluid lines. When you're trying not to make like the perfect mark, I think your lines have a lot more character to them. And that's kind of what the goal is. We don't want these, even though we're doing something that's realistic, we don't want these stiff, mechanical looking drawings. We still want them to be fluid. We want the drawings to flow, and we want them to have like a, a certain piece about them, I guess, is what I'm getting at. And I think one of the easiest ways to do that is start with a very peaceful approach. Okay. So I hope everybody feels good after that. I know I do. I always feel more relaxed and focused. And so we're going to do that again, but we're going to start to use some different patterns that are in the purple coneflower, so that when we get ready to draw this over here, these patterns aren't something brand new that we're just so attached to making perfect that we've practiced them a few times. So I'm going to hold this up. If you can look at the center of, and it might take it a second to focus, the center of the coneflower. It's just these tiny little pieces, irregular shaped, that are just kind of attaching to each other, like one on top of the other. And it's not anything that's super detailed or precise even. They are just these little fragments of like flower parts, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, you'll see what I mean. So we're going to practice that. So you can find in your drawing, you probably have like little areas that just kind of develop. Like I have this triangle right here. So I'm just going to start, and I'm just going to add little tiny irregular shaped, just little, they're not circles. And I'm just going to let them just kind of fill in. They can
Jennifer?
Yeah.
Can you just do them really big for a second so
Yeah.
we can see them, because they're so tiny. I
They
can't
are so tiny. And
even
so-
see what you're doing.
Yeah, so that's a good idea. So what I can do is they're just going to be, they're kind of irregular like this.
Okay. I can see that. Thank you.
Well, I'm having trouble seeing it. I'm thinking, where are my glasses? So I want them to not be all the same, but just to kind of form these little, and you notice that my lines are kind of jagged and irregular here. And at the top, they just kind of, so it's just these little irregular fragments, I guess we could call this. I always like to name my patterns. This could be fragments. So when I'm talking about fragments, you guys will know what I mean. So it looks like this, but smaller. But if you want to try it big, that's fine too. I mean, it'll make it interesting. What you're probably going to notice is when you're finished, this piece is as interesting as the botanical that you're going to do. So at any rate, so I'm going to put our music back on, and I just want you to practice that pattern. This is going to be the center part of the flower right here. Okay, and we'll just kind of condense it down. Now, something else I want you to think about while you're doing this is the reason why it looks a little different here is I have shaded areas. And when you shade with pen, you don't necessarily color it in. You just make marks. Just lines like this. So if you wanted some areas to stand out, they don't all have to go the same direction. You can have some of them go sideways. This is called cross hatching, and some of you are probably pretty familiar with it. But if you wanted, and then you can always darken some areas. But I don't color it in, I darken with line. I just make my lines closer together. Now, if I wanted to make this even darker, I would do another set of lines over top of that going in a different direction. Hence the cross hatch. Okay. So I'll put our music on, and I just want everybody to kind of practice that a little bit for a few minutes. And then we're going to look at Beatrix Potter, and then we're going to get started on our other drawing. So let's see. Okay. All right. So as you can see here, I worked on the bigger one so that you could kind of get an idea of what I was doing. But when you condense it down and make it smaller, it starts to look like the center of a cone flower. So just remember the cone shape. You know, it's skinnier at the top, and you might have some stray little smaller pieces just kind of sticking up like it, you know, and around the edges. But just make sure you're kind of making it into that cone shape. Okay. Any questions about that? Anybody struggling with it or have any questions about, you know, if you're doing it right or, you know, it's art. So there aren't a whole lot of rules. And this is Jennifer's take on botanicals. So Jennifer's take on botanicals is creative. So we are going to copy, but we're a flower, but we're also going to put our own personal spin on it. So with that in mind, I wanted to read this one quote to you that is in my Beatrix Potter book. And it's by William Blake. And it says, the difference between a bad artist and a good one is the bad artist seems to copy a great deal. The good one really does copy a great deal. So, you know, there are no original at this point, you know, so we're copying nature. We're copying nature. You know, things have already been created, beautifully created for us. We don't have to improve on that. We just have to come up with a way to interpret it. And so we're interpreting realistically, but we also want to put something of ourselves in there. We want to put something of ourselves in there that keeps it creative and says that it's our work and sets it apart from maybe everybody else's. So just, you know, kind of keep that in mind as we're creating here. But I want to show you, I marked some pages here in Beatrix, this book of Beatrix Potter, and she recorded beautiful botanicals, and she recorded her, she was an illustrator, you know, Peter Rabbit, all of those books that she did. But she also just on the daily recorded her surroundings, her gardens, anything that was in nature. And so they're beautiful flowers. And most of her work is either in watercolor or it's sketching, or it's a combination of pen and ink or sepia ink and watercolor. So we're going to focus more on her ink and watercolor, but I just wanted to kind of show you, you know, the difference. So this is just a watercolor. It's beautiful, very delicate. And these are not labored over. Okay. You can tell that they were she's probably sitting right in front of it as she painted it. And then just moved on to something else. She also did bugs, which we are not going to do. Not a bug fan. See. But here would be some patterns that she did, and I'm going to hold this up and practice the patterns. And so this would be, I think, the patterns of on the butterfly wings or the moth wings. So, you know, she practiced these kinds of things too. And I didn't even realize that till I went back through this book preparing for this class today. You know, we all think we're original, but we're not. So these are, I love these. These are some of my favorite paintings of hers. I would like to do a series just on mushrooms. They're just the drawing, the lines. In fact, I have a slip drawing pattern that is lichen and mushroom and things like that, because I love these. Now, this is a watercolor. There's not any ink in this one. But look at the depth of color and value. Sometimes people think watercolor has to be just light, and that's not the case. You can have the same range of values in watercolor as you do in everything else. Little sketches here. Now, this is where you're starting to show some of her ink. This was drawn in ink, and then the watercolor came afterwards. And she has different patterns here to kind of differentiate between the different kinds of greenery and things that are in the landscape. And then, of course, it wouldn't be Beatrix Potter if we didn't look at some cute little bunnies, right? But I wanted to point out in this drawing right here, the way that she shaded, and this is what I was telling you earlier, it's the cross hatching. Nothing is colored in, it's just lines that are closer together. And so you can see those lines, and by doing that, it pushes this part back and just kind of brings into focus this area right here. Okay. She also used some white in here over top. We're not going to do that. We're going to save the white of the paper, but if you want to go back and do it later, I mean, nobody's going to stop you, right? So, like I said, you got to put something of your own self in it. But this is really more of what we're going to be doing today. And if you look at this, you can see the ink drawing, and then the watercolor on top of it. Again, recording, you know, you can obviously tell the difference in some flowers and other flowers. And, you know, here are the onions. But I mean, I could spend all day going through this book. So I know you're here to draw, so we won't do that. But again, here is a drawing, and you can see all of the lines. And then you can see the different marks that differentiate different areas. Okay. So just to kind of give you an idea, and if you get time, look up Beatrix Potter, look at some of her illustrations. I mean, you might actually find some inspiration in there like I do. My camera is not focusing. Okay. All right. So we'll switch back to the other one. Okay. So I want to give you a chance before we move on to ask any questions, if you have any. Any observations so far? Anybody? Go ahead, Susan.
Hi. Well, that was a really fun exercise. I haven't done that one, the meandering line. It's seaweedy, and I love ribbon and seaweed. That just makes me very happy. So that was great. And then you mentioned we're going to save the white. I don't have that list. Are we going to use masking fluid or some other magic? Okay.
No, we're just going to think about where it is and paint around it.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
But if the way that you can save the white of the paper, and I always tell people when we get to using the watercolor, is it's watercolor. The water comes first, and the paint will follow the water. So if there's an area that you don't want to have any color on it, don't let the water touch it. Let that part of the paper stay dry, and the paint will go to the other areas where the water is. Now, the reason why we're not using masking fluid, and I don't have anything against it, but I want to keep this kind of free flowing. I want to keep it kind of organic in feel. And when you start to add the masking, you start to get, it starts to look a little more mechanical. And they're beautiful. I love masking, but I'm not going to do it with this. But if you want to do it, go right ahead. Everybody's different. We're not going to be saving too much of the white in what we're doing today anyway. So, but you know, and some of the things that we do later, we might. Each week, we're going to do a different botanical, okay, for each week. And I want to tell you ahead of time, while I'm thinking about it, next week, we're going to do sunflowers. And I know they're not necessarily in season right now, but sometimes it's helpful to know what we're going to do. If you have a picture of a sunflower, or if you have an actual sunflower that you can get your hands on, that might be nice to have like right in front of you to really kind of look at those patterns up close before we start to draw them. So thank you for that question, Susan. Anybody else? Okay, gonna switch back over. And it's still not. There we go. Okay. So I want to try one more pattern before we start to construct our botanical drawing of the day. And that is the leaf, the petal, not the leaf. I was looking at the petals. Okay. And now I think the biggest mistake, and it's not necessarily a mistake, but I think it does keep your drawing from looking authentic, is that people tend to think that all petals are shaped alike, and they're not. If we actually had a purple coneflower in front of us, you would see that some of the petals are flipped upwards, some of the petals are smaller, some are bigger, some will hang down, some might stick up randomly. So what I want you to practice is just drawing petals of the flower, but different sizes. Different shapes. They don't all have to be the same, and they don't necessarily have to be attached to this even. But you can just start to kind of fill in some of your spaces with different type petal shapes like this and make them different. If you find yourself getting to where they're all the same, consciously make a choice not to do that and start to make them smaller or skinnier, some fat ones, some skinny ones. And we're just going to warm that up a little bit for a few minutes, and then we're going to start on our botanical of the day. Okay? Any questions about that? Okay.
Bless you.
Okay, so what I did is I went and added all kinds of petals, different shapes and sizes, just kind of floating around. And then I actually added the petals to the smaller one that I had done down here in the bottom, just to give you an idea that the way the petals actually fall. I mean, most of you are probably familiar with the purple coneflower. But some of the petals, you know, there'll be some that stick out right around that are shorter, and then there'll be longer petals that just kind of start to fall down. Some of them have just got a thin line of petals that go all the way around, and some of them, you know, depending on the type, are a little bit thicker. So you're going to combine, when we do this drawing, the three patterns that we've done today. The fragment pattern, we renamed this one fragment, the petals, and then the long flowy lines will be the stem and the leaves. Okay. So, you know, and the leaves can look a little petal-like too, but I will tell you that when I make the petals, some of you probably noticed, I hold my pen very loosely. I'm not really tight trying to make the perfect line. Okay. I like a more sketchy type quality. So I'm holding it kind of loose. And so that I'm not super attached to, you know, that line. I just feel like my lines have a little more character when I do that. And that's basically the way that I do a lot of my sketching. So any questions about that? Okay. So what I want you to do now, if you have watercolor, and I'm set up here, I have my brushes, my watercolor paints, my water, and I want you to check, if you have a chance, to make sure that your marker is waterproof, because some people might be using something that is not waterproof, and it would need to dry really well before you add any kind of water to it. So I'm just going to take a little bit of color here and just kind of go over top to make sure that the ink that I'm using and the pen that I'm using is not going to run and mix with the paints. So you're just checking to make sure that it's waterproof. Because if it's not, then you can just do a beautiful pen and ink drawing today and save the watercolor for another time. And I'm just doing like little washes here and there. See? And so you can see that my ink is not running at all because the pen that I used was waterproof. Okay. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to start over here, and we're going to talk about composition a little bit before we get started, but I'm going to keep this paper right here, because if I decide that I want to try something, if you know, I want to draw a certain leaf a certain way, I have this to practice on. And you know, we're not using pencil, at least I'm not using pencil. So, you know, if you're using pen and you put it on your paper, it's there, it's not going anywhere. You can, if it's not something you're particularly happy with, you can incorporate it into something else, or you can just learn to live with it. Sometimes it's not as bad as you think it is, and it can just become one of those happy accidents that really looks good in the end. And we've all done that. This is bothering me. I have to finish that now. Okay. So we're going to get started on the fragment part first. Okay. So, all right. So we're going to draw, start with the fragment part of the coneflower, the center part of it, and decide where you want to position this on your paper. Now, I'm going to leave that up to you. You can do one big one, you can do several small ones, but typically when you're working with botanicals, it is not multiples. It is, you know, the same thing, maybe repeated once or twice, but it's not a whole full page, because they want enough detail where you can identify what it is. Now, we're just using botanical word loosely because we are being creative as well. So whatever speaks to you, that's what I want you to do. But I would guard against, for composition purposes, just putting one right dead center in the paper. If you know, off to the side just a little bit is probably your best bet, because it just makes it more interesting. Run it off the page. I mean, sometimes you'll see botanicals that are right in the middle, and because that is strictly for identification purposes. What we're doing is a botanical for identification purposes that's also creative and employing all the other elements of art and design that we like to use. So we're not going to go dead center with just one. We're going to move it off to the side a little bit. If you want to do more than one, think about sizes. They don't need to be the same size. I would say one, there's the rule of thirds. But just kind of keep that in mind. What I like to do is fill the page in some other areas. We're going to use those long flowy lines that we did originally, how we started. And that will fill some of the area in the background as well. So we're going to start with the fragment piece right here. I'm going to do mine just like I did here. So if you would like to try something different, it's just off center, about right here. And I'm going to start with the center. I want it to be a cone shape. And then I'm going to have my petals after that. Okay, so I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to work on the fragment, and then we'll do the petals, and then finish up with the stems and the other lines. And then we'll spend some time doing the watercolor washes and just kind of go from there. Any questions? Anybody concerned about how to get started? Okay. All righty. I'll put our music on so that can be relaxing. I'm going to start about right here. I'm going to go back into this and just add some short little lines in places just to kind of deepen and add some darker areas.
Jennifer, can you talk a little bit about that shading? Because to me, that's what really makes the drawing. And it seems like you have some deliberate ideas about where that shading goes.
I just like to go, usually it's kind of underneath a shape that I really like. and maybe in between a couple of the shapes. And that way, for example, over here, you know, if I wanted this shape that I like to really stand out, I would take some of these little lines and go around it. And maybe in different directions. And then that just kind of pops that one area out. See, it stands out more now more than it did before. So I'm just adding, then because this is so small for this part, it's like little dashes. It could almost be little dots even. And then it just in between some of the shapes. And then just to, you know, sometimes I do across the bottom more in like little, like a linear type space so that you can kind of see the rows of those little fragments, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly what I was.
Okay. And when you start to do that, it kind of helps you to see if, you know, well, maybe I need some more. Maybe that's not quite big enough. So I'm just going to add some more here at the bottom. Again, trying to stay within that cone shape. So I've got a little bit, you know, darker areas in here. And they don't all have to be the same level of shading. You can have some of them a little bit lighter. And I'll hold that up a little closer so you can kind of get an idea of what it looks like. Okay. So next I'm going to start on my petals. And I'm just going to kind of take my time with that. And just have some, I'm going to start with the shorter ones kind of around this part and then let them get gradually a little bit bigger. You just have to be careful when you're using ink that if they overlap, you know, you want to remember not to have a line through something that you want to be on top of something else. So it just because you can't go back and erase. So I'm holding my pen loosely to get some of these petals in here. Like this. And remember, we don't want these to be the same size. We want them to be different. That adds visual interest. And sometimes I do a little bit of a broken line through the center of the petal, or just because the coneflowers do have ridges in the petals. It doesn't have to be through the center, it can be several. I'll hold that up so you can see. You can do as many petals or as few petals as you want. You know, some coneflowers just have one line of petals. I like mine to be a little fluffier than that. So I'm going to go back and do the same thing that I did with the center and do some shading with the lines. So maybe some space in between some of the petals. These are just so that the petals on top will stand out a little. And by shading underneath some of the petals on top, with just those little lines, they're really starting to kind of pop out and look three-dimensional. You guys can see that. And if you want it to be even darker, add another set of lines. And then you start to get some value. One set of lines of the crosshatch. It's a little bit of shading, but if you want it to go darker, do another set of lines. Try to guard against just shading it, just coloring it in, because then it starts to get really flat and dark. And then you can even go onto the petals and do maybe some curved lines, make it feel like the petals kind of curving in and out. And you don't have to shade every single petal if you don't want to. I'm going to hold this up a little bit so that you can see. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to do, and don't feel like you have to keep up with me. I'm just going to show you so that you can, continue to work on this, do more or less. That's up to you. You can go back into it later and add these other parts, but I just want to make sure that I get it finished so that, if you have time to ask questions, and also you can just kind of see how I would finish it. So then, once I get my petals, I go back and just kind of decide, does my center need to be a little bigger in proportion? If so, you can always add some more little fragments. Now I'm going to do my stem, and I'm going to use those free flow lines that we did. Like that. And then I'm going to do some petals or leaves, but they kind of look like petals. And I'm going to do some smaller lines just down one side of my stem, just to kind of give it a little bit of depth, and also let it look like I spent the same amount of time on the stem and developed it to the same point that I did the rest of the picture. And I'll do the same, some lines on the leaves. Okay. So any questions so far? I think this is about all of the drawing that I'm going to do on this one at this point. And I'm going to go ahead and add some of the watercolor washes. Now, you can tape down your picture. And I'll turn this down just a little bit. You can tape down your picture if you don't want to worry about it, kind of buckling. I'm not going to worry too much about sizing the paper or anything like that, but I do like my nice little edge on here. Like dark all of a sudden. I do like a nice little edge that kind of looks like a frame around it. So I'm just using masking tape for this, the removable drafting masking tape. And usually I have a board or something that I will tape it down, make it more portable. But for this, I'm just going to tape it right to my table. Now I pick which watercolor I'm going to use based on the colors that I need. And I don't have the that purple coneflower, pinkish purple color that I want in my palette, except for this one. And I'm using that color right there. And this is not an expensive watercolor set. So, you can spend as much money as you want on watercolor, or you can just get a good, if you're going to use just kind of a student type palette, I recommend Prang, and I know people have had trouble finding it with, the supply chain shortages and stuff. But something with low wax. You don't want something that's going to have mostly wax. And Crayola has a lot of wax. And so I don't typically like to use that one. That's why I like praying. So I'm just going to start with dry paper and wet paint. And I'm going to use a lot of water because I don't really want to get too dark too fast. So I've got this color on here and I'm just going to spread it out. And I'm not coloring in the lines, okay? As you can see, I'm not worried about making it look like I've, colored in the lines. These are washes. This is just to add a pop of color on here. I do want to cover the petals. And so now that it's wet with this color, if I wanted to add some darker purple in some of these darker areas, it will kind of, you see how it's going to run around. So just because the paper's wet, where I'm putting the color, now you notice the paint's not running anywhere else. And that's because it's only going where I put the water. And they're just kind of, so this would be a wet on wet technique when you add color to something that's already wet. And I'm just, letting it just kind of run around in there. Can let some of them be a little brighter than others. And so that was 2 colors that I used, that pinkish purple and then just the regular purple. And I'm just going to go back and add a little bit of more dark in some of these areas, the darker purple. But see how just that gives it so much depth just with using the 2 colors. Now I'm going to let this dry before I do the center, because I don't want that purple to run up into the center when I wet that. So I'm going to work on the green part down here. And I like to take the green and mix a little bit of yellow in it, so it's not quite that Kelly green color. It's more of a spring kind of green. See? And again, just 2 different colors of green. Just to kind of pop that out. This is still pretty wet. So what I'm going to do now, while I'm waiting for this to dry still, is I'm going to do a wet on wet for my background. And so I'm going to use some blues, and then I'm also going to use some salt. So if you look at this background here, you'll see these pattern areas. And they're just, you can see that that's salt. It makes like a chemical reaction, it absorbs some of the paint, and then it also leaves that crystal-like areas. So I'm going to use a large brush and just wet the area where I want the paint to go. But I'm not going to touch the purple area at all, because I don't want these colors to run together. Sometimes I do want that. I just don't want that right now. I'm just going to add some blue. And since there's a lot of water on there, what happens if you touch it, it should start to run. Now, this is where if you have your paper on kind of a board that you can tilt back and forth, you'll get some interesting patterns with the color running, but I don't have that since mine's taped to the table. So And you don't have to fill the whole background. And just kind of let it weave through and around. And I'm going to add some salt. And this is just regular table salt. It does not take a lot. People tend to use way more salt than they actually need. I'm just going to let that dry. Probably go back and add, some other colors at some point. But now I'm going to add my center colors. And I'm going to start with an orange. And just start to just touch it around in here. Now, if this were not something that we had drawn first, it would be a very different procedure to paint this in watercolor. But we are using the watercolor really as an accent to the drawing. So I've got some yellow in there. And I'm just adding little dabs of orange. Just to kind of deepen that a little bit. Now, if you put something on here that you don't like, you can lift. It's just by wetting your brush, using it, getting all the paint off of it, and then just going back and lifting just like that. Clean off your brush, lift, and you see how the color starts to come back off. It's just a lifting technique. You can also blot it, but I blot in case of emergency when it's like it has to come up right now and there's way too much to lift. But typically I would rather use a lifting technique. And then you can go back and just kind of, I wanted to show you what happens when you touch. See, this is called a bleed. That's when your two colors are wet and they come together and then they start to bleed into each other. And that's okay. This is what happens if you have it just kind of run into each other. That's okay. It doesn't look bad. And then now the neat thing about taping your paper down is as it gets wet, because we didn't size the paper first, it's going to buckle. And if it's taped down, it'll dry flat. And so you won't have to worry about any of, having it if you want to frame it or anything like that. If it's not completely flat, you can always take a sponge and just dampen the back of it and then place it between something heavy or just put a heavy book on top of it. And before you know it, it'll be nice and flat. So I'm just going to add some more darker blue here in some areas. And then something else that I like to do while it's part dry and part wet is to add some splatters with the toothbrush, because when the splatter looks different on wet than it does on dry. I've got a little bit of pooling here, so I'm just gonna lift that up. I'm gonna take some of this dark blue and I just get it really wet and put this toothbrush in it. And then if you really want bigger, but you can see how it looks on the dry paper and how it looks when the paper's wet. The splatter has a very different effect. I might do some yellow too. Yeah. Now,
My
what you-
granddaughter makes splatters at school. She says, I'm making it rain.
I like that. Making it rain. So what I would do with this piece, just to tell you how I'd finish it, it needs to dry before I do anything else to it. Once it's dry, I would probably go back into it and deepen some of these shadows so it's more three-dimensional like this one. And then I would add my background lines, the flowy type that we did in the original lines, the meditative, just because I like that. And most of my drawings have got some kind of a background pattern. It's just like a little creative thing that I like to do. And so I'll show you some of the other ones that we'll be doing. So for example, this is next week's that we'll be working on. And you can see the circles. And I added that pattern in the background. Here's the pansy that we'll be doing. And this one has more of a, I don't know, it's more of a twisted line type pattern in there. So, you know, I'm always adding different patterns, and sometimes I use different, depending on how I'm feeling. Sometimes I add, you know, different colors, gel pens. Here's some blueberries that I did. And in the background, these are like swirls done with gel pen. You can see those patterns. So it's always different. I just kind of, you know, think about, you know, what I feel like it needs. It's very, I don't know, intuitive type approach, I guess. So we only have a couple of minutes. So I want to give you a chance to ask any questions. Let me turn our music off completely here. Any questions, insights, anything that you'd like to share? What I would like for you to do is I'd like for you to practice the botanical this week if you have time. It's nice outside, things are starting to grow. Take your pen and some paper and go out into your yard, find a leaf or a branch or a mushroom or a flower, anything, and draw from life. Just record. Remember that botanicals are to record and identify, but also have some fun with it. You know, like add your splatters later, or some different wet on wet techniques, or different mark making or background patterns, anything like that, just to make it fun and give it kind of a whimsical, creative feel to it. Anybody have anything they'd like to share about today? I mean, anybody, I'd like to know if you're happy with how it turned out. Let's see, Cindy. Susan.
Very happy. Thank you. That's really fun.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Yeah, that looks good.
That's exactly
Susan.
what I was gonna say. It's fun. That
Yeah.
takes, yeah.
Good. Oh, that
Yeah,
looks nice.
really enjoyable.
Janet, I like the way you have it curved like that.
Thank you. It
Very
was very
pretty.
fun.
Yeah, good, good. Oh, wow, Mary, beautiful.
gosh. Yeah.
Like it.
I want, wait, I want to see Mary's. Wait, I have to find Mary. Okay. Oh, very nice.
Yeah, that looks good. I like it.
Come on,
Bleeding a
Susan.
little bit, but fun.
Where's Susan's?
Oh,
Mine's
there's Valerie. I see Valerie. If I don't
Oh.
say that I see it, it's because I have to keep switching over. Lynn, hold that up again. I didn't get to see it.
Nice, Valerie.
Oh,
I'm not
pretty.
sure where my camera, oh, there's
Yeah.
my camera.
Valerie, that was beautiful. And Lynn, love it. Very
Thanks,
nice. Oh, Susan, yeah. Now, what color is
Ooh.
that in your background? What did you use?
A combination of blues. I didn't, it's running. I don't want it to run too
Yeah,
much.
no, that's fine. No, you don't have to do it. Yeah, but I like it. Yeah,
I took
nice.
some of the purple and added it to cerulean blue. I don't know what it is.
Mhm.
It looks
Can I
cerulean.
see that? I just scrolled to the right person finally.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, that's
like that.
pretty.
Oh, that's beautiful, Sue.
Yeah. And feel free
Nice,
to go
Susan.
back and add, a dragonfly or butterflies or a ladybug or anything like that.
Well, I love those squiggle lines or whatever you call them, the scrolly thing. I'll be adding that back.
Yeah, I love those too. It's just, I can't draw those enough. It's just something just feels so good making that motion.
And then when you're gonna add those, you can't go on top of unless you're making it look like there's ribbon or something on top. You have to kind of go
Mhm.
past the, okay.
Yeah. And, and you'll go around the flower. That's why I waited with this to do, after I was finished,
Yeah.
because I didn't want the lines going through the flower. I wanted to go around the flower. So
Nice.
Barbara, what did you do? I didn't see yours.
Where's
Ooh,
Barb?
pretty. And you have a lot of
Nice.
the white of the paper, and I love the splatters. Very
Yeah.
nice. Very nice. Liz, what have you got?
I can't see everybody. Let's see.
Ooh, yeah. I
Ooh.
like the way it runs off the page.
Yeah.
That's
I
interesting.
like that, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Nice clouds in the background.
Mm-hmm. Barbara, yep. Oh, that's
Nice, Barbara.
Gosh, Barbara's got 3
nice.
flowers. Wow.
And then
I
Bonnie,
just,
what'd you do?
Bonnie's muted.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I couldn't find you. It took me a long time to get zoomed in, so I can't, where am I? I
Up
can't-
higher, put it over your face. There we go. Nice. That's beautiful.
Oh, nice.
Excellent.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
did
yeah.
2 flowers too. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
You made
that's
up for being late.
Yeah,
You got a lot
I've got the
done.
squiggle lines over here. I call them squiggle lines,
Yeah.
and then the flower over here. So I don't know. It's I didn't get the shading part. I didn't understand that part, but
That's
I'll
okay.
practice.
It's just more smaller lines cross-hatched on top of each other.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Jennifer, I just want to say I really, really appreciate the playing part and having the two things, playing with all the different lines before
Mhm.
the drawing, because that just freed me up so that this drawing itself isn't so precious.
Mhm.
And it was, and the loosely held pen too was super helpful direction for me for the leaves. I
Mhm.
think I was clutching my pen very tightly when I was doing it.
And no, and that's what I do too. And I feel like, your lines have so much more character when you are more loose with it and just kind of let that spontaneity. I mean, you're in control, but there's also that level of spontaneity that you're letting to come back in when you kind of loosen up a little bit. Don't hold on
Well,
too tight.
even Leah, look at the difference in your 2 pieces. With the lines, your leaves are a lot more fluid and
Mhm.
kind of crazy, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah,
they are.
and they both look good, but
Mhm.
yeah, the kind of crazy petals are nice too.
Mhm. Yeah, and it just gives it, you can tell it's a purple coneflower, but it just takes it away from being, just an absolute reproduction and adds a level of creativity to it, which makes
Yeah.
it more interesting. So, so this was fun. I had a great time, and I'm happy that you guys are joining me. We have 3 more classes, and like I said, next week we'll be doing sunflowers, my favorite. You can see.
What are the other 2 weeks? What do we do in the other 2 weeks? Do you
Well,
know
we're
the
doing
flower?
a pansy one week, and I'm working on some zinnias right now, because I really love that pattern, but it's not quite finished. I'll show you what I've got so far. So this will be one of them.
Lovely.
I'm still working on that one. I get sidetracked, as every artist does.
Mhm.
So anyway, all right, so we're past our time, so I'm going to let everybody go, but thanks again for joining me, and I will see you next week.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, bye.
Bye,
Bye.
Fran.